Kia ora koutou, my name's Marnie Prickett. I'm a research fellow at Otago University, but I also am the science lead at the Public Health Communication Centre, which is based out of Otago University, but it's an independently funded organisation, and we're dedicated to increasing the reach and impact of public health research. So that's our role, and our purpose is to effectively communicate public health research and evidence in order to protect and improve the health and the well-being and the equity of the people who live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the health, of course, of the environment in which we live. And so that's the purpose of me being here this morning, is to communicate public health evidence and talk through the implications of this bill, of these bills, I should say, for public health. And so the overarching message I want to send to the Select Committee this morning is to think of these bills as public health bills. I know that they do many things, they have many roles, but they are fundamental public health bills. They protect against illness, against injury, and against death in severe cases where we have major problems. They will have a profound impact on the health and well-being of generations of New Zealanders. So they are going to have lasting impacts on how well people are, how thriving their communities are, whether or not they're facing things like air pollution, like drinking water pollution, and other harms of environmental degradation. So the implications of these bills could be positive if they are rewritten. Currently, as they're written to date, they will have negative negative impacts on people's health and well-being. They're likely to deepen the harm of environmental degradation. They're likely to intensify climate change impacts, and they're very likely to entrench inequalities and inequities that leave some of our people and communities particularly vulnerable and suffering unjust hardship and ill health. For these bills to have a positive legacy, which I'm sure that you all want, they need to have, and I know we've talked about there being a long list of goals, but I think that health must be one of the goals. It is something that is fundamental to all of us. It's something that we no matter your colours, it's something that's very important to us all, the health and well-being of our families and our communities. So health must be a goal. And in order to achieve the health and well-being of people and communities, we need to have health of the environment as a goal. It's hopefully by now, as we've just seen over the summer, we've had extreme weather events. It's hopefully abundantly clear to all on the Select Committee that we have eroded our foundation, the foundation of the natural environment, by continuing to degrade it relentlessly, really. And when we damage that foundation of the natural environment, we leave ourselves more vulnerable, more exposed to the impacts of climate change. We leave ourselves more vulnerable to illness, to injury, and to death. And I'm not exaggerating when I say death. 3,000 New Zealanders die prematurely each year from air pollution as an underlying driver of that premature death, and we also have had deaths from drinking water contaminations and other environmental pollution. So for this reason, I'm trying to convey to you my overarching message, which is that this is a public health bill. These are public health bills. But also I want to get across today that if these bills allow for ongoing degradation of the natural environment as they're currently written, they will not endure. Almost by definition, they will not endure because they will increase the harms to the community, and the public will not want to endure that. And those harms to the environment amplify one another. So you don't just get one harm to the environment which sits in isolation. They contribute to each other, and they become cascading effects, and they amplify that impact. The public will not want to endure that. They should not have to endure that. But as these bills are currently written, they will have to endure that. They'll have to endure ongoing degradation of their natural environment and the implications of that. Others have already talked about the failure of these bills to adequately address climate change. So they have very minimal regard to climate change, which is one of the biggest impacts on our health and well-being in the future, now and into the future. And that's only going to get worse. We talk about adaptation, but adapting to what? If we don't mitigate, then the adaptation will become more and more and more challenging and more difficult. And we're seeing around the country people attempting to adapt under very challenging circumstances. And I think about Tairāwhiti, for example, out in Gisborne. Those rolling challenges are very difficult to adapt to. And I think we throw around the word adaptation quite loosely, but adapt to what? What are we expecting our communities to adapt to? So I'm going to just focus on two really specific policy issues because these are really big bills. We have limited time, and I just wanted to sort of drill down into the two things that I thought were most important for public health. Actually, they're probably not the most important for public health, but they are front of mind for me, and I think they're really, really important. And that is limits. So we've talked about limits earlier today. And also I want to talk about hierarchy and the idea of primacy of the natural environment, because I think that that's often misunderstood, the value of that. If you do manage to get my full submission, which I hope does come through to you, you'll see that along with my other co-authors, we wrote what's called a briefing on the Public Health Communications Centre. And it's a briefing on the implications of this bill for drinking water. And the limits come into that really clearly. So we, back in the day, Amy Adams, when she was the Minister for the Environment, she talked about limits in the National Policy Statement. And she talked about the reason that you would have a bottom line is that that's a safety net for the public. That was the word that she used. She described it as a safety net. And limits are a safety net. They're a safety net for you. You should be able to improve wherever you would like to go. I think it's on the community if they would like to get to that B band, get to that A band, depending on where they are. But you need to have a bottom line, and that's where national level policy comes in. And the bottom lines are, as Amy Adams said, a safety net for the public. But what's presented in the NEB, particularly, is a safety net that is full of holes. There are so many holes in that limit setting process that anything really could get through, to the point where if you're not going to meet those limits, you can simply write a justification report. There doesn't seem to be any sort of, how many communities can write, or how many councils get to write a justification report saying they're not going to meet their limits before those justification reports become absurd. I mean, you could just have, are 50% of the councils going to be able to write justification limits to say that they're not going to meet those limits? It's one of those holes. The other hole is that these aren't going to be evidence-based limits. They're not going to take into consideration physical realities in the environment. We do have to make value judgments as decision makers and policy makers, but we can't make value judgments around physical reality, biophysical realities in the environment. Things do what they are going to do. There are realities that we have to consider. And so those limits are already making that value judgment. They're making the value judgment too early in the process. They're saying we need to weigh up our community's economic aspirations in the setting of those limits, rather than having limits that are on a sort of grading system as they are in the NPS, and then choosing among those limits, but not allowing for, but still having that backstop of the bottom line. And it's interesting to hear that life supporting capacity has become a new and unusual term. Life supporting capacity has been in the RMA since 1991, so it's not a new term, and we have had that in our law for some time. Finally, and there are other issues to do with those limits. I'm sure that you've sort of worked your way through them, but there are many ways that that people, councils, polluters can avoid meeting those limits. It's written, as I say, there are just many, many holes, giving consideration of, for example, I'll just look up the exact term there. Have regard to rather than give effect to. So in the NPS, it was give effect to, and now it's have regard to. So all of these things add up for drinking water, particularly that drinking water comes out of our environment. It is not disconnected from our environment. I heard the previous speaker suggest that we could have human health limits and environmental limits. Actually, those things are very much intertwined, and drinking water is a really good example of that, which will bring me on to my last point, because I'm conscious that
just to let you know, you literally have about 5 minutes left. So and there's some members with questions. So if you want to perhaps wrap up.
Yeah, I'll finish up. So the reason that this brings me on to hierarchy is that we've really misinterpreted this idea of the hierarchy of obligations. We've kind of had it as a winners and losers thing in our mind. Whereas to me, what it says is it's saying we have to look after that foundation. First, we look after the foundation, the water body itself, which is where we draw our drinking water from. And if that water isn't in very good state, it's going to be very expensive to treat, often unaffordable to treat. Think about sediment and nitrates, particularly when you're thinking about stuff like that. And so if you protect that foundation through Te Mana o Te Wai and that hierarchy of obligations, then you can provide good quality drinking water to your community. You can have stability and health in your community because you're able to provide that stability. And then you can consider your activities on top of that, which are hopefully restoring and having minimal impact on the environment. That will take some time, obviously, because we've got a long way to go. But ultimately, the idea is that you have a healthy foundation. You're able to provide that drinking water, and you're able to consider your other activities in your community that you need to undertake. So I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We've got a question from Grant, and then we'll go to Lan.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. So what do you say? Because I mean, you want to put the health of the water body in there at the very top, right? And so what do you say to and not have the economic considerations sit alongside the health of the environment? You want the health of the environment to sit on top of that. So what do you say to the I'll pick, I'm a farming communities who have acknowledged that we've got to work overtime to improve our impact, yet they've still got to make a living and employ people and create jobs for people and income for our economy, so we can pay for the sorts of things that you'd like to achieve. What do you say to those families who are sitting in a hall and they're faced with someone saying to them, well, actually, we don't think what you're doing is good enough, and the health of the water body is more important than the health of your family's business and so forth?
I would say, again, that we've understood this and we've flipped how we're thinking about this. And I honestly think that it's partly a semantic issue. If we don't protect our foundation that we live on, so you don't want to erode the foundation, and the foundation is a stable environment, and farmers more than anybody need a stable environment. Climate change is going to have a huge impact on farming and agriculture in New Zealand. And I know that farmers all over the country, many farmers, have managed to actually restore that foundation on at farm scale, and sometimes at catchment scale, but most often at farm scale. They're restoring that foundation, and they're actually protecting that foundation in perpetuity. And so what I would say is no one is expecting that things change overnight. That is not, New Zealanders are reasonable people. We're not expecting that all farming and agriculture switches overnight, but we are expecting that because our foundation is now so eroded that it is harming us, we're expecting that we will restore that foundation to the point where it can support us all in perpetuity, our children, our grandchildren. And if we continue to erode that foundation, those farming communities are going to struggle as much as anybody. So it's not about people doing the wrong thing and not enough thing. It's about recognizing that the health of the water body, it's not coming first. It's not a winners and losers game.
That's what you said. You said it was coming first.
That's how it's
at
written
hierarchy.
in I actually intentionally flipped it.
You put
I
it in-
flipped it and I said, this is not about winners and losers. It's not about first, seconds and thirds. It's about foundations of the foundation of the environment, then the stability of the community and access to good quality drinking water, because nothing shuts down a community faster than not having access to good quality water. And then it's about reviewing and managing our activities, including our commercial activities over time, so that they minimize the harm that they have on those other things that we need.
Okay, just time for one last quick question.
Thank you so much for the analogy of the safety net. And you mentioned the importance of like intergenerational equity. Do you think there is a way to sort of have almost like a backstop in the legislation, like with something like a maintain or improve clause that, you know, given this is pretty rushed and we're moving through this process.
We could just get to the question, we've got to move.
Is a maintain or improve clause something that could be part of that?
Yes, maintain or improve. I'm baffled why maintain or improve isn't there. We've had maintain or improve since 2014. It came in under a national government. It's a really good idea, maintain or improve. It's basically just saying that that you shouldn't allow further degradation. And that's what I'm saying is that if this bill, which it currently does, allows for further degradation, it won't endure. By definition, it will not endure. It can't. And so maintain or improve to me is kind of a minimum. That should be there.
Okay, look, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
submission, and we will ensure that we get that submission up online.